The moon was bleeding in the sky when he tore the necklace from my throat, the sound of the chain snapping echoing through the hall like a thunderclap of doom. His eyes burned into mine, not with anger, but with something that hurt more: recognition. In that instant, I stopped being someone and became just a shadow, cast out from the only place I had ever known as home. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The moon that night had the color of blood spilled in silence, and I could still hear the echo of the door closing behind me, the hollow sound of expulsion. I didn't need him to say anything beyond the cold sentence that cut through the air like a sharp blade. "You no longer belong in this place." His words were a decree that tore me from myself, turning me into a shadow detached from my own body. I left the castle with a throbbing heart, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes following me, as if each gaze wanted to brand me with the shame that now belonged to me completely. I was declared a traitor, without a defense, without a witness, without the right to the truth. Just the king's seal on my condemnation, heavy as molten lead on living flesh. And the worst part was knowing there was no lie in his accusation. Only a truth too twisted to be understood by those nobles with their cruel laughter and empty hearts. They say an alpha never errs, that his word is law and his will, a decree of fate written in the stars. I believed that for too long, with the blind faith of someone who knows no other way of existing, until the day I realized his power was not made of just brute force or absolute command, but of a loneliness so deep it devoured everything around it. I saw in his eyes the abyss where duty devours the man whole, and perhaps that's why he hated me with such intensity. Because I saw him, because I touched what he hid even from himself, that open wound that no crown can heal. When the wind cuts at night, I still smell the iron and smoke of the hall where it all happened. That golden hall, filled with voices as false as copper coins painted gold, where the laughter of the nobles is crueler than any whip. I was humiliated before all of them, before the elite who had always seen me as less, as an intruder in a world that did not want me. The necklace they gave me the day I entered the castle, a symbol of loyalty and belonging, was torn from my neck with a gesture so precise that the sound of the chain breaking seemed to rip the very air. I remember his hand, firm and relentless, holding the metal that was still warm against my skin. I remember the exact moment our gazes met, and something that wasn't just anger flickered there, brief as lightning before a devastating storm. There was pain in that look, and surprise, and a restrained violence that seemed about to explode. And yet he condemned me, with the steady voice and stone face a king must have when he crushes what he loves. My story began long before that night of the blood moon. It began the day I arrived at the castle, a 16-year-old girl with no family, no name that mattered. Just another orphan the war had left behind, like unwanted wreckage. The plague had taken my mother when I was only 8, and my father never returned from the battles on the eastern frontier. I survived on the streets of the capital for years, learning to be invisible, to steal just enough not to die, to trust no one. It was Lady Marian who found me trying to snatch bread at the market. I expected to be beaten, perhaps, handed over to the guards. But she just looked at me with those tired eyes and said she needed someone to help in the castle kitchens. She didn't ask my name, didn't want to know my story. She just gave me a chance I didn't deserve and which I seized with both dirt-stained hands. The first few months were a constant discovery of a world I had only seen from afar. The castle was immense, with corridors that seemed endless, halls that could hold entire villages, towers that touched the clouds. I worked in the kitchens before dawn, peeled potatoes until my fingers bled, washed pots until my back screamed in pain. But I had a roof over my head, food in my stomach, and that was more than I'd had in years. The other maids looked at me with suspicion, as they always had. I was too different, with my hair too dark, my skin weathered by the sun of the streets, my rustic manners that betrayed my origin. They whispered when I passed, laughed softly at my ill-fitting clothes, at the clumsy way I held the fine silverware I had never touched before. It was like that for almost a year. Invisible in the shadows of the castle, just another pair of hands that worked without question. Until the night I saw him for the first time for real, not just in a glance down the corridors or from afar during ceremonies, I watched hidden behind the columns. There was a feast in the Great Hall, a celebration for a victory in some distant battle that meant little to those who lived in the cellars. I was helping to serve the wine, carrying a tray too heavy for my thin arms. The hall was filled with nobles dressed in silks and velvets, their jewels shining under the light of 1,000 candles, their voices raised in conversations I didn't understand. That's when I tripped. My foot got tangled in the hem of some important lady's dress and the tray slipped from my hands. The sound of silver hitting the marble floor was like a thunderclap in the sudden silence that fell. The wine spilled like blood on the polished floor, staining the dress of the woman who shrieked with indignation. I fell to my knees immediately, trying to clean the mess with my own hands, muttering apologies that tumbled from my throat tight with fear. I knew what happened to servants who made mistakes like that. I had seen people expelled for less or worse. The woman whose dress I had ruined was Duchess Valentina, known as much for her cruelty as for her beauty. She looked down on me with a contempt so pure it seemed to burn my skin. Her face was red with anger and she raised her hand, clearly about to strike me. That was when a voice cut through the air. A deep voice made of command and absolute power that made everyone in the hall freeze where they stood. "Stop." That was all he said, a single word that sounded like a final decree. I lifted my eyes for the first time and saw him. King Dante was standing a few steps away, tall and imposing in his dark garments that seemed to absorb the light around him. His eyes were the color of burning amber, too intense to be human, and they were fixed on me with an attention that made me forget to breathe. The Duchess lowered her hand immediately, giving a quick curtsy, her words coming out in a mumble of apologies. But he wasn't looking at her. He kept looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, as if he were trying to read something written on my soul. "Get up," he ordered, and his voice had lost that earlier hardness, becoming something different, something that made my heart beat erratically. I obeyed on trembling legs, getting to my feet with my head bowed, not daring to meet those eyes again. "What is your name?" The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked my name in that castle. I was just the new maid, the orphan from the streets, the one who didn't matter enough to have an identity. "Eleanor," I answered softly, my voice almost inaudible in the tense silence of the hall. "My name is Elena." He was silent for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me as if it was something physical, tangible. Then, with a sharp gesture of his hand, he dismissed everyone around. "Clean this up and continue the feast. And you," he said, pointing at me, "come with me." My heart raced in panic. I thought I would be punished away from the eyes of the court, perhaps thrown into the dungeons or simply cast out into the dark of night. I followed him with hesitant steps as he crossed the hall, people moving out of his way as if he were a living fire that burned everything it touched. He led me to a library I didn't even know existed, a silent place filled with ancient books whose leather spines smelled of history and secrets. He closed the door behind us, and for the first time in my life, I found myself completely alone with the most powerful man in the kingdom. "Why were you so frightened?" he asked, leaning against a heavy oak table, his arms crossed over his broad chest. His eyes still studied me with that unnerving intensity. I ruined the Duchess's dress," I murmured, my hands trembling as I clasped them in front of my body. "I beg your pardon, Your Majesty. It was not my intention." A strange smile touched his lips, not exactly amused, but something close to it. "The Duchess has dozens of dresses, and most of them are equally hideous." He pushed away from the table, taking slow steps in my direction, and I had to fight the instinct to back away. "You were scared because you thought I would punish you." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, unable to lie under that gaze that seemed to see through all my fragile defenses. "How old are you, Elena?" The way he said my name did something strange in my chest, as if those two syllables gained weight and meaning when they came from his mouth. 16, Your Majesty. 17 at the next full moon." He nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "And how long have you been at the castle?" "Almost a year," I replied, my voice still low but firmer now. Lady Marian brought me from the streets. I work in the kitchens. I've noticed how you watch everything, he said, surprising me completely. In the corridors, during the ceremonies, you look at things as if you're trying to memorize every detail, every face, every word. Why? The question left me speechless for a moment. No one had ever noticed me doing that. No one had ever paid enough attention to me to perceive my silent habits. Because, I began, choosing my words carefully, I want to understand. This world is so different from everything I've known. The people here follow rules I haven't learned, speak a language that goes beyond words. I watch to try to learn, to not make mistakes that would cost me the only place I have to be. He moved closer, and now he was so near I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scars that marked his strong face the way a muscle pulsed in his jaw. You're intelligent, he said, and there was approval in his voice. More intelligent than most of the nobles who fill this castle with their empty arrogance. I didn't know what to say to that, so I remained silent, my heart beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. Starting tomorrow, he declared, turning toward the door, you will no longer work in the kitchens. You will be transferred to the personal service of the Royal Library. There is much work to be done there, organizing manuscripts, cataloguing new books. It's a job that requires attention and care. Do you think you can do it? Yes, Your Majesty, I replied quickly, hardly believing what I was hearing. I will do my best. He opened the door, but before leaving, he turned to me one last time. And Elena, he said, that strange smile touching his lips again. You don't need to call me Your Majesty when we are alone. My name is Dante. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in that silent library. My entire world turned upside down by an encounter that lasted only a few minutes, but would change everything. The following months were like living in a dream from which I feared waking at any moment. Working in the library was unlike anything I had ever known. The silence there was respectful, almost sacred, broken only by the soft sound of pages turning or the slow shuffle of feet on the stone floor. The head librarian, Lady Beatrice, was an elderly woman with sharp eyes who wasted no words. She taught me how to handle the old books with care, how to identify the manuscripts by their marks and seals, how to organize the volumes according to a complex system that I slowly came to understand. The work was meticulous, requiring patience and concentration, but I loved every moment of it. For the first time in my life, I had access to knowledge. In my spare time, when my tasks were done, Lady Beatrice allowed me to read. I started with simple stories, tales that helped me improve my still hesitant reading. Then I moved on to more complex things, books on history, philosophy, even some treatises on the laws of the kingdom. Dante appeared in the library with surprising frequency. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but I soon realized he was making excuses to be there. He needed to consult an old document, verify a piece of information in some treatise, search for a specific book that always seemed to be in the very section where I was working. We would talk. At first, it was just brief exchanges, comments about the weather or a book he had mentioned. But gradually, our conversations deepened, becoming long discussions on topics ranging from politics to philosophy, from ancient history to future dreams. I discovered that behind the mask of the relentless king was a deeply lonely man. Dante had taken the throne at 19, after his father's sudden death in battle. He had been forced to grow up too fast, to make impossible decisions, to bear the weight of an entire kingdom on still young shoulders. He told me about the sleepless nights, about the counselors who pressured him from all sides, about the constant feeling of drowning in responsibilities he never asked for. And I listened. I just listened, without judging, without trying to offer solutions I didn't have, without pretending to fully understand what it was to wear a crown. Perhaps that was what he was looking for in me, someone who saw him as a man before seeing him as a king. But the castle had eyes in every shadow and ears in every wall. The other maids began to notice the king's frequent visits to the library. The whispers multiplied, gaining venom with each repetition. She thinks she's special. She's using her body to climb the ladder. She's just another opportunist trying to take what doesn't belong to her. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my work, but the words hurt like thorns buried in my skin. And it wasn't just the maids. The nobles also began to look at me differently. The ladies of the court shot me icy glares whenever they saw me in the corridors. The lords made low-voiced comments that weren't quite low enough for me not to hear. The worst of them was Duchess Valentina. She had become my personal enemy since the night of the stained dress, and the attention the king gave me only intensified her hatred. She made a point of humiliating me whenever she could, in front of witnesses, with cruel comments disguised as concern. "Poor child," she said once during a dinner where I was serving. "It must be so confusing for someone of your background to be in such refined environments. I hope you aren't deluding yourself with fantasies unsuited to your station." The other ladies laughed, that crystalline, cruel laughter that seemed specially crafted to cut. I felt my face burn with shame, but I kept my head down and continued my work in silence. But Dante had heard. I saw the way his jaw tightened, how his fingers closed tightly around his wineglass. "Duchess," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Perhaps you should worry less about the origins of others and more about the origin of your own arrogance. I'm sure a deeper investigation would reveal a great deal about how your family acquired its current position." The silence that followed was absolute. The Duchess turned pale, her hands trembling slightly as she muttered an apology and lowered her eyes. No one else made comments about me that night, but I knew that would only make things worse. Dante had defended me publicly, and that was like throwing oil on flames that were already burning too high. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I found Dante in the castle gardens. The moon was almost full, bathing everything in a silver light that made the flowers look like pale ghosts. He was standing near the central fountain, hands in his pockets, his gaze lost in the waters that shimmered under the moonlight. "You shouldn't have done that," I said softly, approaching slowly. "Now they will hate me even more." He turned to me, and even in the dim light, I could see the intensity in his eyes. "Let them hate," he replied. "I don't care what they think." "But I care," I retorted, feeling tears burn my eyes but refusing to let them fall. "I don't belong in this world, Dante. I'm an intruder here, and every day that passes it becomes more obvious. You can ignore the venomous tongues, but I can't. They follow me down every corridor, remind me at every moment that I will never be enough." He took a step toward me, then another until he was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Enough for whom?" he asked, and there was something fierce in his voice now. "For those empty nobles who have never worked a day in their lives. For the ladies who spend their days inventing intrigues and the lords who only know how to lick boots? All for you," I answered before I could stop myself, and the truth of those words hit me like a punch. "For the king who will one day have to choose a queen of noble blood, someone who can bring alliances and power to the kingdom, not an orphan from the streets with no name and no future." "Eleanor," he said my name like a prayer, and then his hands were on my face, holding me with a gentleness that contrasted with the strength I knew he possessed. "You think I care about noble blood? About political alliances that only serve to trap me further in this gilded cage?" "You should care," I whispered, but my own hands were already rising, touching his chest, feeling his heart beat as fast as mine. "It's your duty as king." "Then maybe I'm tired of duty," he murmured, leaning closer, his forehead touching mine. "Maybe just this once, I want to choose something for myself. Someone who sees me, who hears me, who wants nothing from me but my company." And then he kissed me, and it was as if the whole world caught fire around us. His lips were hot and demanding against mine, his hands sliding to my waist and pulling me closer. I clung to him as if I were drowning and he was my only salvation, responding to the kiss with all the repressed passion that had grown in my chest over those months. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing heavily, our faces still close, our bodies still pressed against each other. I knew it was madness, that this could only end in disaster, but in that moment I didn't care. I just wanted one more second of that feeling of completeness, of belonging to someone who also belonged to me. The days that followed were stolen, secret moments we lived in the shadows while the castle slept, meetings in the library late at night, strolls through the gardens under the cloak of darkness, whispered conversations that lasted until dawn threatened to discover us. Dante showed me parts of himself that no one else saw, the vulnerability he hid under layers of authority, the fears he never admitted aloud, the dreams he had abandoned when he placed the crown on his head. And I fell in love. deeply, desperately, completely in love with a man who could never be truly mine, with a future that could never exist. But the heart doesn't understand impossibilities, and mine was already irrevocably given. It was Lady Marian who warned me first. She pulled me into an empty corner of the kitchen one morning, her calloused hands gripping mine with urgency. "Child," she said, and there was fear in her kind eyes. "You need to be careful. People are talking, and they're not good things. There are those who plan to use this against you, against him." "I know," I replied. But my voice didn't carry the weight of concern it should have. I was so lost in the impossible dream that I couldn't see the nightmare approaching. "You don't understand," she insisted, squeezing my hands. "The council is pressuring the king to marry. There are princesses being offered from neighboring kingdoms, alliances that could secure peace for generations. And you," she paused, and I saw tears shining in her eyes. "You are in the way of all that. They will destroy you, Elena. They will do whatever it takes to get you out of the picture." Her words hit me like cold water, partially waking me from the fantasy I had allowed myself to live in. But even then, even knowing the danger, I couldn't pull away. It was as if we were trapped in a dance whose steps would inevitably lead us to disaster. But neither of us could stop dancing. The change came with the blood moon. It's a rare phenomenon, happening once every several years, when the moon is tinged red during an eclipse. The elders say it's an omen, a sign that great changes are coming, not always for the better. On that specific night, the omen proved true in ways I could never have imagined. There was a banquet in the Great Hall, a celebration in honor of ambassadors from a distant kingdom who had arrived with marriage proposals for Dante. Among them was Princess Isabella, a woman of stunning beauty and impeccable royal posture, exactly the kind of bride the council would approve of without hesitation. I was serving wine, my usual position during formal events, trying to keep my eyes down and become invisible in the shadows. But I felt Dante's gaze following me, heavy as a physical caress even across the distance that separated us. Every time our eyes met accidentally, it was as if an electric current passed between us. Princess Isabella was sitting next to him, chatting animatedly about I don't know what, her melodious laughter filling the hall. She touched his arm lightly as she spoke, a casual gesture that made my stomach churn with irrational jealousy. I knew I had no right to feel that she was everything I was not and never would be, but I couldn't control the pain that pierced me. It was Duchess Valentina who initiated the disaster. She had drunk more wine than she should have, and her tongue had loosened with pure malice. "Your Majesty," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I have a question. Is it true that our dear king has shown an unusual preference for a certain maid from the library?" The silence that fell over the hall was instant and absolute. All conversations ceased, all eyes turned to me, and I felt my face burn under the weight of so many accusatory glares. "Duchess," Dante's voice was pure ice, "I suggest you measure your words more carefully." But she was beyond reason, fueled by wine and the desire to see me destroyed. "Oh, I beg your pardon, Your Majesty," she continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's just that I'm sure our illustrious guest would like to know if there are any, shall we say, complications that should be considered before we proceed with the negotiations." "There are no complications whatsoever," Dante replied, but his voice had lost that controlled coldness, gaining a tone of barely contained fury, and I advised that this conversation end now. "So the stories are false?" One of the lords dared to ask, and others nodded, too curious to stay silent. "The maids have been spreading rumors that Your Majesty spends entire nights in the library, always accompanied by the same young woman." "Surely there is an innocent explanation." Dante stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. His expression was one of such intense fury that some of those present instinctively recoiled. "What I do with my time and with whom I choose to spend it is no one's business in this hall," he declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "And anyone who dares to question my decisions again will personally discover what happens to those who overstep their bounds." But the damage was done. The poison had been planted, the seeds of doubt sown. I saw Princess Isabella's expression change, her elegant smile turning into something hard and cold. The ambassadors exchanged significant glances, and I knew that night had ruined any chance of an alliance. "Your Majesty," a new voice cut through the tense silence. It was Councillor Roderick, the oldest and most respected of the king's councillors. "If there is truth to these rumours, then we have a serious problem. A king cannot be seen favouring a maid over the interests of the kingdom. It creates instability, feeds discontent. It puts everything we have worked for at risk." Dante turned to him, and for the first time, I saw real fear in the old councillor's eyes. "Are you telling me how to rule my kingdom?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm now. "I am trying to protect your kingdom," Roderick replied, holding his ground despite the visible fear. "And sometimes that means protecting the king from his own choices." It was Princess Isabella who spoke then, her voice melodious but icy. "I believe it would be best if my father and I withdrew our offer," she said, rising gracefully. "Obviously, there are matters here that need to be resolved before any alliance can be considered." And she looked directly at me as she said it, her blue eyes full of aristocratic contempt. As she and her entourage left the hall in heavy silence, I felt the world collapse around me. I had ruined everything. My simple existence, my inconvenient presence, had destroyed an alliance that could have brought prosperity to the kingdom for generations. "Elena," Dante called my name, but I couldn't look at him. My hands were shaking so much that the wine pitcher almost slipped from my fingers. "We need to talk." But before either of us could move, Councillor Roderick spoke again, and his words were like a death sentence. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I think this conversation should take place in the presence of the full council. Tomorrow in the official chambers. There are decisions that need to be made, and they affect not just Your Majesty, but the entire kingdom." Dante wanted to protest. I saw it on his face, but he was surrounded by expectant gazes, by silent pressure from all sides. Finally, he nodded rigidly. "Tomorrow, then," he agreed. But there was a promise in his eyes when he looked at me, a promise that he would fight, that he would not abandon me. But I knew reality better than he did. I knew that some battles were lost before they even began, and this was one of them. That night, alone in my small room, I looked out the window at the blood moon that still stained the deep red sky, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same. Dawn came too early, bringing with it the weight of what was to come. I couldn't sleep. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in desperate circles, trying to find a way out that simply didn't exist. When the first rays of sun began to filter through the window, I got up and dressed with mechanical hands, preparing myself for what I knew would be my last day in the castle. The summons arrived before breakfast. A guard knocked on my door with instructions to present myself at the council chambers immediately. I followed him through the empty morning corridors, my steps echoing against the oppressive silence, every beat of my heart aching in my chest. The council chambers were an imposing, circular room with dark wood-panelled walls and high windows that let in light but not warmth. There was a long table in the centre, and around it sat the 12 members of the council, all old men with severe faces and judgmental eyes. Dante stood at one end of the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tight with barely suppressed fury. "Elena?" Councillor Roderick greeted me with a nod as I entered. "Thank you for coming. Please stand there." He indicated a space in the centre of the room where I would be seen by all. I felt like a criminal on trial, and I suppose that was exactly what was happening. Dante began to speak immediately. "This is ridiculous," he declared, his voice reverberating off the walls. "Summoning her here as if she were an accused, treating her as if she committed some crime. I will not allow it." "Your Majesty," Roderick replied calmly, "we are here precisely because Your Majesty has allowed too much. This situation has gotten out of control, and now the entire kingdom knows. Rumours spread like wildfire, and with them comes instability. The people question your judgment. The nobles conspire. Alliances are lost. This cannot continue." Another councillor, a portly man with a greying beard, leaned forward. "The girl is pretty, no one denies that," he said, examining me as if I were a piece of meat at the market. "But she has no bloodline, no name, nothing to offer the kingdom. She is a distraction, and distractions are dangerous for a king." She is not a distraction, Dante retorted, taking a menacing step toward the table. And I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. Then what is she? Roderick asked. And there was genuine curiosity in his voice now. What exactly does this young woman represent to your majesty that justifies risking so much? Dante fell silent, and I saw the struggle on his face, the battle between what he wanted to say and what he knew he should say. Eleanor is, he began, then paused, searching for the right words. She is someone who sees me as a man before she sees me as a king. Someone who offers me truth when everyone around me offers only flattery. She is important to me. But more important than the kingdom, another councillor asked softly. More important than peace, than prosperity, than the future of thousands of people who depend on your decisions. I saw Dante waver, and it was like a stab to the heart. Because I knew the answer he had to give, the answer any king should give. No, of course not, he finally admitted, and every word sounded like defeat. Nothing is more important than the kingdom. Then your majesty understands what needs to be done, Roderick said, and there was relief in his voice. Please do not misunderstand, your majesty. We do not question your feelings, but a king cannot afford to follow only his heart. He must think of the greater good, of the consequences of his actions. This young woman, as lovely as she may be, represents all of this. As long as she is here, as long as there is this hesitation, the kingdom will suffer. No, Dante said firmly. There are other solutions. We can find a way to make this work. I will not simply discard her as if she meant nothing. Your Majesty, Roderick stood up now, his hands resting on the table. We are not asking you to discard her. We are asking you to let her go, to free her from the impossible position you both find yourselves in. She can live a good life elsewhere, perhaps in one of the distant villages, with resources to start over. And your Majesty can fulfill your duty to the kingdom, can make the necessary alliances, can rule without this shadow hanging over every decision. That's when I finally found my voice. I'll go, I said, and all eyes turned to me. There need be no more discussion. I understand. I always have. Whatever this is, it could never last. It was madness from the beginning. Eleanor, no. Dante started moving toward me, but I raised a hand to stop him. Please, I whispered. And I felt tears burn my eyes but refused to let them fall in front of those men. Please don't make this harder than it already is. You know they're right. You know this is the only possible ending for us. I don't accept that, he said fiercely, but his voice was trembling now, revealing the emotion he was trying to hide. There has to be another way. There isn't, I replied, and finally the tears began to fall, tracing hot paths down my face. And it's okay, I am grateful for everything. For the months we had, for the conversations, for the stolen moments. I will cherish these memories for the rest of my life. But now I have to go, and you have to let me go. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Dante looked at me as if he were watching his own heart being torn from his chest, and I wondered if that's how it looked to him. If love always hurt this much when you were forced to abandon it. Then it is decided, Roderick said softly. Miss Elena will leave the castle today. We will arrange for adequate resources to ensure she has a comfortable start elsewhere. And this matter will be closed. But it wasn't closed, not even close. Because what happened next would prove that some stories refuse to end so easily. Dante demanded to speak with me alone before I left. The councillors reluctantly agreed, but only for a few minutes, and only in the chambers where they could watch through the open doors. We stood facing each other, the distance between us seeming greater than it really was, both of us unsure of what to say. I don't want you to go, he finally said, his voice hoarse with restrained emotion. Not like this. Not because of them. I know, I replied, and my own tears had already dried, leaving only a deep weariness. But it has to be this way. You are the king, Dante. You have responsibilities that go far beyond what we feel for each other. And I can't be the reason you fail to fulfill those responsibilities. He took a step forward, his hands taking mine, squeezing them tightly. I will find you, he promised. When things calm down, when I find a way, I will come for you. Don't do that, I begged, my voice breaking. Don't make me wait for something that can never happen. Let me go for real, Dante. Let me try to rebuild a life without you, as impossible as that seems right now." He pulled me into a hug then, and I let myself melt against him one last time, memorizing the feeling of being in his arms, the scent of his skin, the sound of his heart beating against my ear. "I love you," he whispered into my hair. "You need to know that at least. I love you more than I should, more than is safe, more than is wise." "I love you too," I confessed, and it was as much a relief as it was agony to finally say those words out loud. "I will always love you, but love isn't always enough, is it?" "It should be," he murmured, but his voice carried the defeat of one who already knows that reality does not bend to our desires. When we pulled apart, we were both red-eyed, both carrying the weight of a future we would never have. The guards came for me then, escorting me back to my room to collect my few belongings. In less than an hour, I was in a carriage leaving the castle, looking back through the window as those familiar towers grew smaller and smaller in the distance. The carriage took me to a small village on the edge of the forest, a simple place where no one knew me and no one asked questions. The guards handed me a purse with enough gold coins to live comfortably for years, and then they left, leaving me alone in a world that seemed strange and empty without his presence. The first few days were the hardest. I would wake up expecting to hear the sound of the castle bells, expecting to see Dante appear in the library with that small smile he reserved only for me. But all there was the heavy silence of the forest and the emptiness that grew in my chest with each passing day. I rented a room in a modest inn, a small but clean space with a window that overlooked the dark forest. The innkeeper, a woman named Catherine, was kind but not intrusive, offering me simple meals and leaving me in peace when she sensed I wanted to be alone. The village was small, with just one main street where the market, the blacksmith and the tavern were located. The people were simple, working the land or hunting in the forest, leading quiet lives far from the intrigues and power games of the castle. I tried to fit in, buying groceries at the market, exchanging polite greetings, but I always felt like a stranger observing a life that would never be truly mine. The nights were the worst. Lying in the dark, my mind would inevitably wander back to Dante. I wondered what he was doing, if he thought of me as much as I thought of him, if he had accepted some marriage proposal from some princess of royal blood. The pain was physical, a tightness in my chest that never fully eased. It was on the third full moon night that I realized something was wrong. I woke up with a shiver running down my spine, a feeling that someone was watching me. I got up silently and went to the window, looking out into the forest bathed in silver light. And then I saw him. Not Dante, but something different, something that made my heart stop. There was a wolf at the edge of the forest, huge, bigger than any wolf I had ever seen or heard of. Its fur was black as night, but its eyes were the color of burning amber, unmistakably familiar. It was impossible. It was madness. But as the wolf looked at me from a distance, as those amber eyes pierced me with the same intensity I knew so well, I knew. Somehow, for some reason I couldn't comprehend, it was him, Dante. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling the cry of surprise that threatened to escape. The wolf didn't move, just continued to watch me. And there was something in its gaze, something that made me feel both safe and terrified at the same time. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and disappeared into the darkness of the forest, leaving me trembling at the window, questioning whether I had really seen it or if I was losing my mind in the loneliness. But the next morning, I found deep claw marks on the trunk of the tree nearest the inn, and I knew it hadn't been a dream. The wolf's appearances became a pattern. Every full moon night he would come. He would stand at the edge of the forest, watching me through the window, his amber eyes glowing in the dark. He never came closer, never made a sound, just watched as if to make sure I was okay, that I was safe. And each time, I felt the same mix of fear and longing, the same impossible certainty that this wolf and the man I loved were one and the same. I started to do research, discreetly asking the villagers about old legends, stories of shape-shifting creatures. It was Catherine who finally told me. Late one night, when I couldn't sleep and had come down to the kitchen, I found her sitting by the fire, mending old clothes. She looked at me with those wise eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "You've seen the wolf." It wasn't a question, but a statement. I wondered when you would ask. I sat down next to her, my heart racing. "What do you know about it?" She sighed, putting her sewing aside. "It's an ancient curse," she said softly. "One that has run in the royal family's blood for generations. They say the first king made a pact with ancient forces to gain enough power to unite the kingdom. But all power has a price. The curse was the price." "What kind of curse?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Every full moon the king transforms," she explained. "He becomes a wolf, loses his human form until dawn. It's a well-kept secret, of course. The common people don't know. But those of us who live near the forests, those who pay attention, we know. I've seen the wolf before when the old king was still alive. And now I see the sun." My mind reeled with this information. It all started to make sense now. Dante's absences during the full moons, the way he sometimes looked at the moon with an expression that mixed fear and resignation, the strange comments about not being able to control everything in his nature. "Is there a way to break the curse?" I asked, desperate. Catherine shook her head slowly. "Not that I know of. Many have tried over the years. Witches, sorcerers, priests. But the curse remains. It's part of them now, part of what it means to be king of this land." I felt tears burn my eyes. So he's doomed. Doomed to live like this forever, torn between man and beast. "We all carry our curses," she said gently, placing a wrinkled hand on mine. "Some are just more visible than others. But," she paused, looking at me intently, "he comes to you every full moon. That means something." "What does it mean?" I asked, barely daring to hope. "It means that even in wolf form, even when his humanity is suppressed, he still seeks you out. Still needs to know you're safe. The bond between you is stronger than the curse, child. And that," she smiled sadly, "is both a blessing and a torment." In the nights that followed, I began to wait for the wolf's appearances with a mixture of anticipation and pain. I knew it was wrong, that I should be trying to move on, but I couldn't help it. Those brief moments, seeing him even in animal form, were the only connection we still had. I started to leave the inn when I saw him, standing outside in the cold night, just looking back at him across the distance. I wanted to get closer, wanted to touch him, but something held me back. There was danger there, I could feel it. Not just the obvious danger of being near a wild predator, but something deeper. The danger of never being able to truly move on if I kept feeding that impossible connection. But my heart wouldn't listen to reason, and neither, apparently, would his. It was on a particularly cold night, when the moon was more red than silver, that something changed. The wolf appeared as always, but this time he came closer, step by step, slow and cautious until he was only a few feet away. I should have run. I should have gone back to the safety of the inn. But instead, I remained motionless, my heart beating so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Our eyes met, amber against darkness, and I saw in that gaze something that went beyond animal instinct. I saw recognition. I saw longing. I saw love. Slowly, so slowly that each movement seemed to last an eternity, I held out my hand. The wolf tilted its head, considering, and then took a step forward. I felt its warm breath on my skin, the wild scent of forest and night that emanated from it. And then, with a gentleness that completely contrasted with its fierce appearance, it pressed its muzzle into my palm. The contact was electric, shooting through me like a lightning bolt, and I felt tears begin to fall silently down my face. "Dante," I whispered, and the wolf closed its eyes as if my name caused it pain. "I miss you. Every day. Even knowing we can't be together, even knowing it was the right choice, I still miss you in a way that consumes me." He whimpered softly, a sound of pure agony, and then pulled away. But before disappearing back into the forest, he looked at me one last time, and in that look, there was a promise. It's not over. Somehow, this is not over. The months passed in a strange and painful routine. During the day, I lived my simple life in the village, helping Catherine at the inn, occasionally working at the local market, trying to build something that resembled normality. But on the nights of the full moon, I was his again, waiting in the darkness for the appearance of the wolf that carried the eyes of the man I loved. And he always came, Without fail, without exception. Every full moon he was there, and each time he came a little closer, until we began our own silent rituals. I would sit on the cold grass, and he would lie down close enough for me to touch his fur, to feel the warmth of his body beside mine. I would talk to him on those nights, tell him about my days, about the people I had met, about the small joys and sorrows that made up my new life. And he would listen, his eyes fixed on me, sometimes tilting his head as if he understood every word. I knew it was madness. I knew I was clinging to something that could never be real, that I was living in a fantasy where a cursed king and an exiled maid could somehow have a future together. But those nights were all I had, and I clung to them with a desperation that bordered on obsession. It was Catherine who finally confronted me. "You can't go on like this," she said one morning after another full moon night. "You're consuming yourself, child. Living only for those few moments once a month. This isn't a life." "It's the only life I have," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "It's the only way I can be near him." "But it's not really being near him," she insisted, her hands gripping mine tightly. "It's being near a shadow, a version of him that can't speak, can't truly touch you, can't offer anything but silent presence. You deserve more than that." "I don't want more," I confessed. And the tears finally came, all the tears I had held back for months, pouring out at once. "I just want him. In any way I can have him. Even if it's just this, even if it's just one night a month, it's enough." But it wasn't enough. I knew it and she knew it, and somewhere deep inside me I knew it had to end. That I had to find a way to truly move on, to build a life that didn't revolve around an impossible love. But before I could make that decision, before I could find the strength to pull away for good, something happened that would change everything again. It was a moonless night, pitch black, when the soldiers arrived. I woke to the sound of horses and loud voices, to the clang of metal on metal and cries of alarm. I ran to the window and saw torches moving through the village, illuminating uniforms I recognized, the royal emblem shining on the guards' armor. My first thought was that Dante had changed his mind, that he had come to get me. But then I heard the words the soldiers were shouting, and my blood ran cold. "By order of the Royal Council, Eleanor of unknown origin is wanted on charges of witchcraft and attempting to bewitch the king. Surrender her immediately, or the entire village will suffer the consequences." Witchcraft. The accusation was absurd, ridiculous, but I knew exactly what was happening. The council had found a way to eliminate me permanently, to ensure I could never return, never pose a threat to the stability they prized so much. Catherine ran into my room, her face pale with fear. "You have to run," she whispered urgently. "Now. Through the back door into the forest. I'll buy you some time." "I can't let you face this alone," I protested, but she was already pushing me out of the room. "Go," she ordered, with a force that brooked no argument. "And don't look back. The forest will protect you. Trust it." I had no choice. I heard the soldiers banging on the front door, their voices demanding entry. I ran through the dark corridors to the back door, stepping out into the cold night with nothing but the clothes on my back. Behind me, I heard Catherine yelling that I wasn't there, that I had left days ago. I ran into the forest, my bare feet bleeding on the roots and stones, my breath coming in clouds of vapor in the cold air. Branches scratched my face and arms, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to get as far away as possible before they realized Catherine was lying. I ran until my legs gave out, until I fell to my knees in a small clearing, gasping and trembling from cold and exhaustion. I was lost, alone in the dark forest with no food, no shelter, no idea where to go or what to do. And that's when I heard the howl, a sound that cut through the night like a blade, primitive and powerful, making every tree around me vibrate with its intensity. It wasn't a full moon night, but somehow I knew who had made that sound. Dante. The howl was followed by more, an answer from other wolves in the forest. And then, through the trees, I saw shapes moving, shadows that took form until they became real wolves, dozens of them, their eyes glowing in the darkness like fallen stars. And at the front of them all was the largest one, the one with the black coat and amber eyes that I knew so well. He approached slowly, and for the first time since I had fled the castle, I felt truly safe. The wolf pressed its muzzle against my face, a surprisingly gentle gesture, and then turned, looking at the pack behind him. The other wolves approached, forming a circle around me, and I understood. They were protecting me, accepting me as one of their own. Dante growled low, a sound that was clearly a command, and the pack began to move. Some headed back toward the village, presumably to confuse the soldiers. Others stayed with us, forming a guard around us as Dante guided me deeper into the forest. We walked all night. I stumbled frequently, my sore feet barely able to keep going, but whenever I started to fall, Dante was there, his large, warm body supporting me, keeping me on my feet. The other wolves of the pack accompanied us in silence, grey and brown ghosts moving between the trees like smoke. When the first ray of sun began to light the horizon, we arrived at a place that seemed to have come out of a dream. It was a cave hidden behind a waterfall, a sheltered space where the water created a silver veil that shimmered in the nascent light. Inside, the floor was covered with soft moss, and there were signs that someone had used this place before. The remains of an old fire, a few old but clean blankets. The wolves dispersed into the forest, returning to wherever they called home. But Dante stayed, entering the cave with me, his body beginning to glow with a strange light as the sun rose completely. I turned away, giving him privacy, and heard the sounds of transformation, bones cracking and reshaping, skins stretching. It was only a few seconds, but it seemed to last an eternity. And then, a voice I hadn't heard in months, a voice that visited my dreams every night. Elena. I turned, and there he was. Not the wolf, but the man. Dante, naked and vulnerable, his eyes still that impossible amber, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. There were marks on his skin that hadn't been there before, new scars that told stories of battles I hadn't witnessed. "You're here," was all I could say, my voice breaking with emotion. "You're real. This is real." He crossed the distance between us in 2 long strides, pulling me into his arms with a force that was almost desperate. I clung to him, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine, the sound of his heart beating strongly in his chest. The scent that was uniquely his mixed with something wild and earthy from the forest. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured against my hair, his voice choked. "When I learned the council had sent soldiers after you, when I found out the false charge they invented, I thought I wouldn't make it in time." "How did you know?" I asked, pulling back just enough to see his face. "I have allies," he explained. "People who disagree with the council, who believe they went too far. They warned me. And then," he paused, his eyes searching mine, "I did something I should have done months ago. I stopped letting others decide my life for me." "What do you mean?" "I renounced the throne," he said, and his voice carried both relief and pain. "I abdicated in favor of my younger brother, who was always better with politics and alliances anyway. I am no longer king, Elena, I am just a man. A cursed man, yes, but free. Free to choose my own path. Free to choose you, if you'll still have me." Tears streamed down my face, but this time they were tears of joy and disbelief mixed together. "You abdicated. You gave up everything." "I gave up nothing that mattered," he corrected, his hands holding my face with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. "The kingdom has a new king, one who will be better than I ever was. And I," he smiled, a small but genuine smile, "I finally have a chance to live. To truly live, not just exist under the weight of a crown I never asked for." "But the curse," I started, but he shook his head. "The curse remains. It always will. Every full moon I will be the wolf, but I've learned to accept it, to understand that it's a part of me now. And maybe with you by my side, it's not a curse anymore. Maybe it's just another way of being." I kissed him then, with all the hunger and desperation of months of separation. He responded with equal intensity, his hands tangling in my hair, his body pressing against mine as if to merge us into one. When we pulled apart, we were both breathless, both with eyes shining with emotion and desire. "Stay with me," he asked, and his voice was pure vulnerability. "Not as a maid and a king, not as impossibility and duty, just as us. Just as Elena and Dante, 2 exiles finding a home in each other. Yes, I answered without hesitation. Always yes. Forever yes. We made that cave our home. Dante had prepared, had brought supplies hidden over the weeks. Clothes and food and everything we would need to survive away from civilization. The forest became our kingdom, truer than any castle had ever been. We lived simply, hunting and gathering, building a life with our own hands. During the day, we were just two people learning to be together without the pressures and expectations that had weighed on us before. We talked for hours, made love under the sun filtered through the trees, laughed at small things we hadn't had time to appreciate before. And on the nights of the full moon, I would sit outside the cave and wait for the transformation. Dante always tried to get away before it happened, worried about hurting me, but I refused to let him go through it alone. I would stay there, witnessing the change, watching the man I loved become the beast that was also part of him. And when the transformation was complete, when the wolf with amber eyes looked at me through the darkness, I felt no fear, only love, because it was him, always him, no matter what form he took. Months turned into years. The forest protected us, hid us from the eyes of the world that wanted us apart. Occasionally, we would hear news from travelers who passed near our territory. We learned that Dante's brother was ruling well, that he had made the necessary alliances, that the kingdom was prospering under his leadership. And we were content with that, because we had found our own way to prosper, our own version of happiness that didn't depend on anyone's approval or acceptance, but our own. There were difficult times, of course. The winter was brutal in the forest, and there were nights we clung to each other just to keep warm. There were times when Dante struggled with the guilt of having abandoned his duty, when I saw the shadow pass over his eyes and knew he was questioning if he had made the right choice. But in those moments, I would hold him and remind him of what we had gained: freedom, choice, love without conditions or compromises. And slowly, the shadow would disappear from his eyes, replaced by the certainty that yes, we had chosen right. The forest ended up giving us more than we had expected. We discovered a small community of others like us, exiles and outcasts who had found refuge among the trees. People with their own stories of impossible love, of choices that defied expectations, of the courage to live authentically even when the world said they shouldn't. We became part of that community, contributing what we could, receiving in return true acceptance and friendship. There, it didn't matter that Dante had been a king, or that I had been a simple maid. We were just Elena and Dante, two people who had found their way to each other against all odds. And when I discovered I was pregnant, almost 3 years after our escape, I knew our story had found its true ending. Not the ending people expected, not the ending that would have been written in fairy tales, but our ending. Real and imperfect and perfectly ours. Dante cried when I told him, tears of joy and fear mixed together. "We have to be careful," he said, his hands trembling slightly as they touched my still flat stomach. "The curse, it can be passed down. Our child might carry the same fate." "Or they might not," I replied, covering his hands with mine. "And even if they do, we'll teach them that it's not a curse. It's just part of who they are. We will love them unconditionally in all their forms, just as we love each other." He smiled then, that smile that always made me feel as if the sun had risen especially for me. "You always know what to say," he murmured, pulling me into his arms. "How do you do that?" "Because I love you," I replied simply. And that's what love is. It finds the words when there are none, finds the way when it seems impossible, finds the light even in the deepest darkness. Our daughter was born on a full moon night, under the same bloody sky that had witnessed so many important moments of our story. Dante was in wolf form when she arrived, but he stayed just outside the cave, howling at the moon as if announcing to the entire universe that we had created life, that we had transformed our story of exile and renunciation into something new and precious. The community helped us, wise women who knew how to bring children into the world safely. And when I held our daughter for the first time, when I saw her eyes open to reveal that same impossible shade of amber, I knew she would carry her father's mark. And I didn't mind one bit, because she was ours. The product of a love that had defied kings and councils, that had survived exile and curses, that had proven to be stronger than any obstacle the world could place in our path. We named her Luna, in honor of the moon that had witnessed every crucial moment of our journey. And as I held her with Dante transformed back into a man at dawn and kneeling beside us, looking at us with a reverence that made me feel like the most loved person in the world, I knew our story had come to its true end. We didn't live happily ever after in the way fairy tales promise. We had hardships, challenges, moments when we fought and disagreed. Luna grew up being half girl and half wolf, and she had to learn to navigate between two worlds, two natures that didn't always coexist easily. But we learned together. We built a life that was authentically ours, free from the expectations and pressures that had nearly destroyed us. And every full moon night when Dante and Luna transformed, I would sit outside the cave and watch them run together through the forest, two amber-eyed wolves playing under the moonlight. And in those moments, I felt a gratitude so deep it filled me completely. Gratitude for having had the courage to love when I was told I shouldn't. Gratitude for Dante having had the courage to choose his heart over his duty. Gratitude that we had found each other in a world that wanted to keep us apart. Years later, when Luna was a strong and independent young woman, when fine lines began to appear around Dante's eyes and a few silver strands appeared in my dark hair, we received an unexpected visit. Was Dante's brother the current king, who came alone and in secret, following clues it had taken him years to piece together. He found us in our clearing, where we had built a small wooden house over the years, a more permanent place than the cave that had been our first home. The brothers looked at each other for a long moment, years of separation and different choices weighing in the air between them. And then the king smiled, a genuine and warm smile, and hugged Dante tightly. "The kingdom is well," he said when they pulled apart, "prosperous and at peace. You made the right choice, brother, for you and for all of us." He spent only a day with us, meeting Luna, hearing our stories, sharing news of the world beyond the forest. When he left a message we would carry with us forever. "The council is different now," he said. "Younger men, with more open minds. They recognize that the way they treated you was wrong, that persecuting Eleanor with false accusations was a shame upon the kingdom. If you ever want to come back, if Luna ever wants to know her roots, you will be welcome. Not as king and maid, but as free citizens, as family." It was a generous offer. And a part of me, the part that still remembered the frightened young woman who had been cast out into the night, wanted to accept it. But when I looked at Dante, when I looked at the life we had built, I knew we didn't need anyone's forgiveness or acceptance. We already had everything we needed. "Thank him," Dante said to his brother. "But this is our home now. These are our neighbors, our community, our life. We are no longer running or hiding. We are just living the way we choose to live." The king nodded, understanding shining in his eyes. "Then live well," he said, "and know that you will always have a friend on the throne, should you need one." When he was gone, Dante pulled me into his arms, and we stood like that for a long time, just holding each other under the afternoon sun filtering through the leaves of the trees. Luna came to join us, our beautiful wild daughter, perfect in her duality, and hugged us from both sides. "This is enough," Dante whispered, and I don't know if he was talking to me or to himself. This was always more than enough. And he was right. It was more than enough. It was everything. Because not all exile is forgetting. Sometimes it is just the prelude to a return. Not a return to the place we came from, but a return to ourselves, to the truth of who we are when all the masks and expectations are stripped away. And sometimes, just sometimes, the blood moon that witnesses our despair also illuminates the path to our salvation. Not in the way we expect, not in the way we plan, but in exactly the way we need. This is my story. The story of a maid who loved a king, of a king who chose to be a man, of two exiles who found each other in the darkness and built their own light. It is not a perfect story. It does not end with a true love's kiss that breaks all curses. But it is our story, and that makes it the most precious of all. If this story touched your heart, leave your comment telling us what moved you the most. Your like and subscription to the channel mean a lot and help us continue to bring stories that speak directly to the soul. Share this narrative with those you love, because stories of true love deserve to be spread throughout the world. Until the next story, may your heart always be open for the impossible to become real.